All right, guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Grand Prairie PD podcast. Here with a special guest host, Joe.
I don't feel like a guest anymore, just more of a traveler. Stopping
Yeah,
for a
Katie
visit
was-
every once in a while.
Katie was cheating on me for a little bit, so
He was.
They involved you.
A little lover's quarrel.
Yeah. Here today with Officer Tyler, and I did pronounce that correct
Yeah, you did.
because you spell it weird.
I spell it correctly.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please, you explain that?
Yeah. Any other time you see I is Y is, TI is bow tie, TIE-LER. It makes sense.
Yeah. I give it
Y
to you.
is phonetically incorrect in between two consonants. Like
Do
that.
do people mess up? Like, do
I'm Tiller all day long.
Tiller?
I'm Tiller or Tiller.
You've had this conversation a bunch
Man,
because
a
you're talking
bunch,
about
a bunch.
like between
You see-
consonants. You put
You see
some
my
thought into
my
this.
resolve, right?
Yeah.
My mom spelled it correctly.
So wait, so people see that knowing it's a first name, and then they just are like, oh, no, Tiller makes sense. Like that
Right.
sounds like a common first name.
Yeah. Right.
And not try with the...
Yeah. Yeah. That's the English language though. So
It's also probably the level of schooling and intelligence in some people too.
but it's Tyler.
You're assuming I didn't see it and think Tiller.
I'm gonna go ahead and continue to assume that.
I actually didn't because it didn't have the second L. So I was like, yeah, probably not Tiller. Well, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you are now and kind of where you came from?
Yeah. Again, Tyler Reese. I was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana.
Okay.
So northern Indiana. So it gets pretty cold in the winters.
So South Bend is in the northern part of...
Yeah, it's on the border near Michigan. Okay. It's, the context is it's about an hour and 30 minutes away from Chicago,
Okay.
east of Chicago. Yeah. So born and raised in South Bend. I went to school out there in Indiana, a small private Christian school. Met my wife while in the summers going to college, and she was from Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay.
She's about 2 years older than me, and so she had a nursing license here in Texas. I knew I wanted to marry her, so there was no reason to ask her to come up to South Bend. So I decided to move down here to Texas,
Right.
and then from there, one thing led to another. I don't know how, but became a police officer here at Grand Prairie.
So whenever y'all moved back down, was she knew you were jumping into the law enforcement?
No, so I was originally coming down here to try to pursue law school.
Okay.
So I was a teacher in South Bend, a 7th grade science teacher.
I didn't know.
Yep, back then.
I see. I keep being surprised. I don't know you.
Yeah.
I know, it's like we know very little. It was great.
Yeah, so I was a 7th grade science teacher, and then I came down here to pursue a law degree. So I took the LSAT, did well, but realizing law school cost a lot of money.
Right.
Recently married and had a baby on the way. Just didn't make sense to do that. So I joined the ministry, man. I was in ministry out in West Dallas for 2.5 years.
Was that a full-time gig?
Yeah, it was full-time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, full-time. It's called Mercy Street. My job there basically was to be a mentor coordinator. I just went to local schools in West Dallas, and I tried to, just gain a rapport with the students and with the teachers, and then eventually gain rapport with the families and try to go get mentors in the Dallas area to mentor these students.
Right.
And so that was my job.
So
I enjoyed it.
Working in an environment like that, I imagine you're at least I'm assuming you're targeting people who are possibly more troubled as a mentor. Or are you dealing with people in that environment where they have probably had interactions with law enforcement previously?
Of course, 100%. Not the kids per se. Some of them isolated incidences, but more of the families.
Right.
Dealing with people who, West Dallas is tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough place to live. And I was working in it's called Crosshampton over there in West Dallas, and so it was common to see police always out there, especially when we're doing events and it's at nighttime. It was common to see all types of stuff and police activity and people having bad interactions with police officers.
Right.
So yeah.
How did you feel like you had one kind of perception of the job that you now have while you were working as a mentor versus how it's evolved into today?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. How can I explain this? I got into policing for two reasons. One was I needed money in ministry. You don't.
Right.
You don't earn a lot of money. Just being honest with you, I had a wife and a kid on the way. So I needed something to kind of supplement our income because my wife wasn't going to be working while she was pregnant.
Sure.
And so being the husband, I had to provide.
Right.
So that reason. And then secondly, I'm a firm believer in what they call at Mercy Street incarnational ministry, which basically means is that wherever you're going to serve, you need to live where you serve, because then you really understand the people there and what they're going through, and because you go to the same grocery stores as they go through. And so because I believe in that so heavily, I was like, what a good way to minister to police officers by becoming a police officer, or what's a good way to really understand, this troubled profession. That's what I looked at it as, this troubled profession, than to actually be one of them and hear from their side. Because I was raised to not necessarily trust police officers, respect them, but not trust them.
Right.
And so I've had that with me from, childhood. And so, it looks different when you're actually on this side of the badge,
Right.
Operating and communicating with the public and things like that.
How much of how much apprehension do you have going into it? Like, step one, I'm going to go from, teaching to ministry, which is, I imagine, not having done either one of them, I imagine are somewhat similar. And then going into a job where not only are you're going to have the issues that we deal with on the street, but you already have preconceived notions or apprehensions about the actual people you'll be with. Like, what were some of your thoughts going into it then?
How I be perceived by the community, my community at large. So, will they think, I've been called multiple things while policing. And so what does that look like when it's friends and family?
Right.
And how do they perceive you, like being a police officer now? And so that was a big question I had in my mind, talking through it with my mentors that I had, with my mom, my dad, with just about anybody. I was always talking about it and seeing, the barometer, what they think about it.
Right.
And so those were big questions, the social ramifications of me joining a police force, especially I joined and it was like, 4 or 5 years ago. And so that was a tumultuous time.
Yeah.
I was in college. I graduated college in 2015. And during my tenure in college, we had Baltimore riots, Ferguson riots. It was tough, and nobody was. I mean, you guys probably know. You've been police officers longer than me. It was tough for you all for a while, and how the public perceived you in your career.
Yeah.
And so that's my backdrop coming into adulthood, and then now I'm thinking about becoming an officer.
Yeah.
So that's not something you wanted to be like. 8-year-old Tyler was like, I don't want to be a police officer. So what if you're saying you grew up with an environment, a family environment that was like, hey, respect obviously the authority, but don't trust the authority too. That became an actual serious thing. Was there a single incident that changed that, or is it just kind of like a maturing over time where you thought, well, maybe I need to start thinking about stuff on my own perspective?
That's a good question. Because even now, as a police officer, I get pulled over and I'm scared. I'm just being 100% honest with you. Or not scared, or because I have a knowledge about law enforcement. But that never really goes away. Just things are either confirmed or denied, being a police officer. And it's not necessarily because I had my own personal experiences with police prior to me being a police officer that were both positive and negative. And so most people, before actually learning something, they just go off their experiences. So my experiences kind of informed me on how I should think about the world, think about topics and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily, taking my mother's advice or father's advice or community's advice. It was more about, well, what did I experience? And does that experience match up to what mom is trying to teach me? And if it does, great, cool. If it doesn't, then challenge that, And so does that answer your question?
Yeah, no. So what was it's like when you kind of, the first time you approached it, like, hey, mom, I'm thinking about being a police officer or whatever, I assume kind of what you're talking. I'm getting that it was more of like they were trying to steer you away from it, like more of a like they viewed it as kind of a negative move. Is that accurate, or was it kind of like a mixed bag? Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, mixed bag. Mom is your mom. Mom wants you to be safe, right? Mm-hmm. Mom doesn't want you to go out chasing bad guys and getting in police chases and fighting and stuff like that. It's mom. You know?
Yeah.
So talking to my grandfather and people who were kind of, just being honest with you, who had a more masculine perspective on it, it was more like, are you sure? Never was somebody actually like trying to steer me away. That's more like friends that were trying to steer me away. But family members were like, are you sure? Are you positive? Because this is what you're getting into. From the best of their abilities, what they think the profession is, they're trying to advise me, hey, this is what you're getting into. You're going to have to, be faced with the possibility of defending yourself or putting yourself above, putting yourself below the community in order to serve them. So depending on who you talk to, I would get one answer or the other. Mostly friends were the one that was like, "You tripping? You tripping? What are you doing? Like
that's funny.
You 12s now, stuff like that. But family was more. They're more, more supportive and more just apprehensive and cautious and wanted to make sure I thought through things. Hey, if it's money, Ty, there's other things that you can do to earn.
Yeah. I mean, money. There is.
Are you sure policing is what you want to do?
Yeah.
So just making sure I thought through it all the way.
Has that been assuaged though? Has some of the concerns they have like been addressed now that they have you in that profession and now they have more of that contact? Are they kind of like, oh, okay,
of course, 100%.
Okay.
My mom's like, man, every time I talk to my mom or see her interact with other people, my son's a police officer in Texas. She's proud of that and she's happy about that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's kind of like the same thing if I was never in the military, but I could bet that some parents might not want their child to join the military because of the possibility of actually going to war, but they're proud of that fact that when they graduate and when they're out in the public, I'm a veteran's mom, or my son's in the Army, or my son's, it's one of those type of deals. Yeah,
not for sure. Well, that's cool that it's cool they went that way and not worse where they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's doing all this stuff, especially when you watch the news.
Of course.
And the news only reports the bad stuff, right?
Of course.
We obviously know that the vast majority of our days are pretty chill, tame, positive interactions, but that one bad thing, and they're just going to pump that down people's throats. So obviously, it's probably a lot of your friends, if they haven't been on law enforcement, they're going to go off of like
what they see.
Well, I saw this one thing over here and this one thing over here. Oh, did you hear about this on social media? Oh, did you see this video? It's kind of like, yes, but it's like there's obviously that's not 100%
true.
Where we exist in that part.
Well, and a lot of people, one of the common things that gets pushed out, and as far as I want to say the anti-narrative, because I hate to paint with a broad brush, but the people who are consistently alleging there's systematic issues as far as like targeted discrimination and whatnot, I always say I'm not going to worry about the cops until they worry about the bad apples. Like, so I'm okay painting them all with the same broad brush as long as they're going to cover for the bad ones. So I'm sure if you have friends or family that have that perspective, and then hang on, Tyler is going to go be a part of that, then you got one of two options. Yeah. Either you're going to be the one throwing out the bad apples, or on the other side, after a while, if you're not doing that, it's like, okay, either everything I knew about the profession was wrong, or now Tyler is one of the bad guys.
Yeah.
And none of those, I would imagine, would be
there's a crossroad people have to make. Yeah. People who know me personally, there's a crossroad they have to make. You know, that, okay, am I going to, hey, Ty, like, you're the ops now. Like, you are vehemently against everything I stand for. Right. Or, man, maybe is there something to this? Because I love Tyler and I know him. I've served with him in ministry. Like, what does this look like now that a brother of mine is a police officer?
Because you haven't changed. It's not like like they put a chip in you and you're now a different person or whatever. It's like you're the same person. It just this is what I do as an occupation. Like it's like it's still the same. Just
but people don't
separate it.
They don't want to reconsider long held notions of a group, because then they'd have to admit they're wrong.
Right.
And then they had to admit every interaction they've had in the past where they entered it with prejudice or preconceived notions.
Right.
They have to admit they were wrong. You see the same thing with race.
Yeah.
People don't want to critically think about what they've considered about a group of people, because then they have to think, maybe I was the one mistreating people all this time, instead of,
like, am I the bad guy?
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
If you have to ask that.
Yeah, you're looking in the mirror and having to ask that. It's probably true.
For sure.
Now, on a less serious note, as far as the family relationships and whatnot, how open are you with them about what goes on? Because, we get involved in some pretty gnarly stuff sometimes.
Certain people get to know more than other people.
Okay.
I'm not telling my wife that I got into some bad stuff. Like, that's not somebody you want to worry.
Yeah, I mean, you just
this.
narc on yourself.
Well, like, Mom, I steer away from telling her that, but I have a twin sister, okay? And my twin sister, my brother-in-law, just joined the police academy back in our hometown.
Okay.
And so she's, like, super eager to learn, Ty, like, what am I to expect? Like, I need to talk to your wife. Like, I'm trying to figure this out. And she's, like, almost every other day, like, we always talk.
Yeah.
My twin sister, but, like, every other day she's like, so what happened today?
Yeah.
She's like, I feel like she knows my schedule better than I know my schedule.
Right.
You had to work today, right? So what's happening?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a money-making thing for you, because you can go to your brother-in-law and say, hey, I'm going to need $100 a month to not tell your wife about the bad stuff. Like we're going to, I'll tell her that it's nothing but like rescuing puppies and helping old ladies cross the street, but I'm going to need some money, So this could be an opportunity for you.
You're right. But not like, yeah, my twin sister gets the dirty details, because, I don't want to hide some stuff from her, Mom doesn't get the dirty details. Wife doesn't get the dirty details. Grandfather, he does, because he's so curious. He wants to know.
Yeah.
But those two people are really the ones that get to know everything.
Now, there's a couple different schools of thought to this, but of the people that don't share everything with their spouses, I find there's a couple. What's your thought process behind not sharing with your spouse?
I think you have to know your spouse. You have to know what they can take, and a lot of that's going to take time. The more and more you're in a relationship with your spouse, and more they can handle this, they can't handle this. My wife doesn't need to know that I've been dealing with people's crap all day long when she asked me to take out the trash. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, that's not really, even though that's a true, but I mean, you have to know your wife. If you think your wife can take something, tell her. She might feel, love that you shared, whatever with her. But
so it's not so much for you. It's not so much a concern about that she would be freaking out for your safety as much as it is just keeping a more relaxed atmosphere at home. So you're not bringing home.
Yeah,
all the
work is work and home is home.
Right.
I think that's a key ingredient to a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
Leave when you open that door to your house. That's your house. That's not your job.
Right.
That's to be honest with you, that's priority over your job. Over your occupation. So you don't want to contaminate that with these crazy stories.
I think that's a balance that we've, as a profession, struggled with in the past. I think we do a better job now, but it's such a weird line, because on the one hand, the job has to be important enough to die for.
Yeah.
Which is significant.
Yeah.
But it also has to come second, which is, I think, a weird thing that most people don't really deal with. The military, I guess. But to be so dedicated to something, you're willing to give your life, but then also realize, hey, it is a job. I'm not doing it for a paycheck. Okay, it's a higher calling, but it's still a job, and my family comes first. I do think our generation is doing a little better job of it.
Yeah.
At least I hope.
I mean, you get like my wife, I'll come back home and be like, oh man, I got in this chase and did this and that, and I jumped out, and I was like, oh, that's nice, honey. And I'm like, I just told you how big of a badass I was. And she's like, oh, no, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's like my wife's like not interested at all. Like, she's just like, oh, okay, that sounds good. And just like moves on with life. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess
kind of the same way too.
It's like, all right, I guess I'll just. So now when she's like, oh, how was work? It's like, oh, it was good. I arrested some people, did some stuff. She's like, oh, okay, that's nice. It's like, that's how it is. I'm like, all right, whatever. So I have to talk to my dad and tell him all the nitty gritty stuff, because he wants to hear that. But it's like you said, there is definitely people like. You always go to a party, whether it's like wife's work party or friends, whatever, and they're like, "Oh, tell me a police story." Yeah, it's like you're not breaking out that time that you're like, "Wow, scooping up brains the other day on an accident or whatever." You're not breaking those stories out for these nice people. So you're like, you always have those funny stories Yeah, that you did something and gets people to laugh or whatever, right. And it's like that's the perception they're going away because it's like, well, these people don't need the nitty gritty, and that's not what they're asking for necessarily, right? Like they want to like, oh, tell me a police story. It's like we don't need to be like shoving that stuff in there. Like most people live in ignorance, right? Of like this kind of stuff happens, so it's like, you throw them the funny story that you always have, or as it goes on, you have a handful of funny stories that you just. Oh yeah, at the party, here's the stories I'm going to tell. Right? So
I do think there's a time and place though for certain incidents, especially ones that you think that can affect you and your psyche and it can affect how you operate in your home. Those are some things that you may not want to keep away from your spouse.
Right.
I've seen some hard stuff, and it's like, man, I do need to process this with you specifically.
So my thing is, and the reason I tend, so like the stuff you're talking about, like the chases and whatnot, all day. Now, granted, they're few and farther between now because I do a lot of this.
Yeah.
But
you're a hero in your own right.
Shut up. But half the time I do it because I'm like, oh, she's gonna think I'm a badass, and it's like, come on.
Yeah.
But no, I don't. A lot of times I won't share the stuff that will affect her worldview, because this job, no matter how much we working where we work, we get to have an appreciation for how much we are still appreciated, regardless of the nationwide or global opinions of us. You get to see those highs, but you're still aware of those lows and those dark places, and you can't not be aware of it. And at least insofar as I'm able to kind of cover that for her, I don't want her to know that some of the things happen. Like hey, kids get taken sometimes. You don't necessarily know the details of every single thing that happens after that, or hey, spousal abuse exists, but you don't always know what that sounds like and that smells like and whatnot. So I definitely think it's a balance. For me, it's more of a worldview thing. I don't want to jade her in some of the same ways that the job winds up causing us to be.
Oh, and especially we all have kids here, so it's like when you start talking, like I don't tell my wife anything related to like when kids are the victim, and that's a fairly common thing going on, whether it's just simple abuse or whether it's some of the more heinous crimes. It's like that's absolutely 100% something I will not, because I don't want her to then go like that super overprotective mode and then just be like we're really chasing a boogeyman because it's such a small percentage, but we see it as a larger percentage because that's our job.
That's what we deal with.
Yeah. And I don't want to scare or change that. No, the world is a great place for kids to grow up in, to explore and stuff like that, and you can't hold on to them and just shelter them because of that. Oh yeah, my husband told me this one time in this one place that this happened, kind of thing. So I definitely do not say anything, kid related, just because I don't want it to affect her relationship with my kids, right? And then she becomes that crazy mom. And
I'm sure, like my wife, she kind of balances us out because I tend to be kind of that super protective. You say it's only 0.1% of the time, whatever, but it's like, but I've seen it 5 times,
right?
And so then you see your kid, and it's like, I'm seeing that in them, and she helps balance me out.
Yeah, so those are the things I would say that you probably need to process with your wife. Those things that like may cause us. I mean, a lot of things don't rattle us anymore because we've seen so much. But things that do rattle us, you don't want yourself to become overprotective or to a point where now you're becoming a burden to your family.
Yeah,
So
for sure,
there's some things that I've seen that I've definitely had to. Hey, let's talk just for a little bit. I'm not asking. For much time, but just for a little bit,
Yeah.
Well, they pick up when we're off, and it's like I could just be like, nothing, I'm good, right? And it's like, no, like she's going to continue to see that you're not acting right. So it's like, all right, here's the reason I'm feeling this way. I just need to process it, but here's the reason why. And then it's like, okay, cool. They now know like to give me space or do whatever it is to help me process that. But communication is key. There's definitely too much, right? And then there's definitely on the flip side too little. But we're that's a constant battle. Like, what do I say? How much do I say, right? And all that, like all the details and all that stuff. Like how much? Obviously, we can't keep it in.
Yeah.
What do you do to blow off steam though? So like obviously some stuff that you may not share with your wife, but it's not necessarily the stuff that you need to talk to her about, but you're just kind of like amped up a little bit. Is there stuff that you do to kind of help bring yourself back down to normal?
It's like
Police related hobbies. I know you work out, right?
Yeah. Working out helps. It does help.
It's an accident. He's big on accident.
No,
It's got good genes.
Yeah, working out. I wish.
I know, right?
Working out does help. Man, I like to just hang out. Like I call them catching vibes. So like I go to the skating rink and I skate here at the Forum Roller World.
Oh, right on.
Good vibe, man. Good vibe. It's
So
good
you do all that
people.
dancing stuff?
I
like
do.
that?
I do.
Oh, man.
I am a dancer. I love.
I saw
to
that the
dance.
other day.
I would
love
pay
to
to see that
dance.
because you're not like a small person.
I know. So
I can't
funny,
see it.
dude. My wife laughs at me every time we go skating. I'm like, well, what's going on? And she's like, it's not that you can't do the moves. It's that
Yeah.
you're a 6'3",
Right.
240-pound person trying to do these moves.
Yeah.
You know, and you're doing them well, but it's just you usually don't see people your size doing those moves. So skating is one of those things. Playing ball, playing basketball. I love playing basketball. I've declined over the years, unfortunately. What else? Yeah, I just catch a vibe. I try to drag my wife out dancing and things like that. I love to dance, yeah.
So you said you go to the Forum Roller World here on
shout out
GSW?
to the Forum Roller World.
Okay, yeah, shout out to them.
Shout
They're-
out.
They're all, I mean, it's always packed on the weekend. And there are some people in there with like, I didn't realize how much you can spend on roller skates. Like growing up, I was like, you go to the Goodwill, you
it's
get the
crazy.
dude. There are some
Yeah.
people there with like pushing $1,000 like skates.
That's easy. That's
See?
easy.
Really?
That's easy.
Yes.
That's easy.
Golly.
Easy. My skates, so when my wife, we had our
It's about to
anniversary
flex on
trip.
us with skates.
No kidding.
You know?
We had an anniversary trip to California, and we ended up getting these Sure Grip brand roller skates. And we got the low end, but if you go into the shop, it was like $1,300, $1,400 skates. The trucking
Roller skates.
Yeah, the
man.
trucking is different.
Not even
the actual
blades.
Yep, the plates and the truckings some are made with like a certain type of aluminum, a certain type of metal that it gives, or it's very stable.
NASA made these skates, man.
Right.
Like,
No, there's some like very like high tech skates out there that, I mean, they improve balance. They help you with body fatigue because like the insides of your knees start to creak, and if that's can be related to okay, your wheels are off, or this is off, or that is off. Well, if you pay good money for them, some of those things,
yeah, see,
go
I never.
away, so.
I didn't grow up paying good money for. I mean, I rollerbladed a lot. Don't make fun of me. I've heard that if you go to the Forum Roller World with rollerblades, you're gonna be ostracized.
Yeah, because
Really?
you'll be like one of the only ones. But there's some dudes out there with some rollerblades that
Yeah.
are killing it.
No, they're
straight killing it.
I mean, those guys are more in the. I've seen those guys like in the skate parks, like grinding and doing all that crazy stuff. Like, no, but I did see the the synchronized. There's actually some guys over at over 4th of July. There was like a crew
Nice,
at Tyree Park though in the basketball court.
Yep.
They said
Under the
they had
dome.
like the lights going and music, and I was like, are they? At first, I thought I was like, are they filming a music video or whatever? They out there like doing they had cones set up and they're doing
Dancing,
like the
skating.
dude. I sat there and was like mesmerized. Like it was like I was in a trance just watching. So I could see how it's just like
It's
like
fun. It's a
you
vibe.
bring it down. Plus you're getting out into the community.
Yeah.
because that place is always hopping on the weekends.
It is.
And
See, I go on Thursday, so Sundays it's like super packed. Like you can't, like no room in the parking lot. Like they're taking over the bowling alley parking lot. But Thursday, because I work B-side, Thursday nights are the nights that I go, and it's pretty fun. It's a good crowd. But
so if you want to skate with Tyler, you got to
Thursday
go
night.
Thursday night at the Forum. He'll show you some moves.
Thursday night.
That's crazy. I didn't know it was still
yep.
a big deal. I was reading a book at one point. I forget who it was about, but like their parents owned a roller rink, and they were talking about the crowds, and they were involved in all kinds of like illicit activities,
it's a big deal, man.
dude, it was nuts.
big deal.
That was in like the I want to say like 60s, 70s range, maybe a little earlier. I didn't realize it was still a thing. Man, my one of my sons had a skating party. He loves to skate. He wants to be like a hockey player, and I was like, I throw on some rollerblades to go out there with you, and I did. I didn't fall. I made it like I could walk afterwards. But the next day, the outside of my legs, holy crap, they were killing me.
Yep.
We're not as young as we used to be. So
Dude, I refuse to admit that, like to a fault, like, to a significant fault. I did have a question for you as far as things outside of law enforcement. So you start off as a teacher, and you get to the ministry. Not a big leap to assume that you're religious yourself. So I don't know what your denomination or what some of the denominations, how they all work, but I know there are some religious views that take a very hard line against any type of violence or aggression.
Yeah.
How does police work and what you have to not only see but do marry with some of your religious considerations?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. So I went to, I don't want to be too technical here. I went to a college that was also a seminary.
Okay.
I didn't go to seminary, but there were certain core classes we had to take in order to, it's called the Grace Corps. In order to get our diploma, like these are, every college has that, those
core curriculum.
core curriculum. So there are certain core curriculums, and one of those is called essential doctrinal themes. And so just themes for you to work out about your doctrine, how you're going to live the faith that you claim that you believe in. And one of those periods had to do with like violence and had to do with like being a soldier or being in law enforcement. And so we studied Thomas Aquinas's just war theory, which is just, again, it sounds very technical, but I was just able to reconcile there's a time and place for everything. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it talks about a time for war and a time for peace, a time to harvest and a time to sow. And so that's one of the main tenets that I believe and hold fast to when it comes to law enforcement, is that there's a time and place for everything, including war. There's multiple times in the Bible where God is carrying out justice through war.
Right.
Of course, there's an ugly side of war, from people being abused and whatnot, but the Lord is still working through us to complete a certain plan, and that at times has to do with war.
Right.
And so being a law enforcement officer, my job is to treat people with respect and dignity, and that's a core tenet of being a believer in Christ, is to treat people as if they're in the image of God. They're made in the image of God. And you can do that while arresting someone.
Right.
You can treat someone with dignity and respect and know that they have intrinsic value and worth while being in a fight with someone.
Yep.
There's levels to it. So, hopefully that answers.
Yeah,
a little
no,
bit
that
of what
I kind of have the same. I have the same kind of general thought process, not based in religion, but like I always tell people, because we'll get people giving us pushback or whatever. You have to be polite, because a lot of times we have a choice. We can use force or we can yell, and sometimes the yelling is not polite, because if I got to choose, if I need to physically grab you and throw you on the ground or speak to you mean so you listen to me before we even get to that point, I'm going to speak a little rough.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a natural progression.
That's context.
Right.
There's context to everything that we do as well.
100%.
I'm not. If I were to, and I don't advocate for this, so, but cursing and things like that. There's some contextualization that has to go
100%.
along with that.
Yep.
It's actually cursing can be a very very useful tactic.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who, until they hear something that is so far outside of the realm of what they're used to hearing, they're not going to snap out of whatever hyper or what the term
whatever state that they're in.
Yeah, they're so stressed that you a phrase, it might not always be cursing, but snapping them out of that.
Yep.
Yeah, it can be yelling. It can be a first and a middle name. It can be any number of things. But yeah, if I would get people saying, "Oh, you have to be polite. You can't talk like that. You can't be rude." And it's like, no, I just have to be professional. Like, I can be professional to you and sit down and talk about what we're gonna have for lunch. I can be professional and point a gun at you if I need to. Like, there's you can do a lot of things in this job and be professional.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same general thing, but that's how I approach it.
So what did you get your degree in then?
History.
History. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Just
Any
general
particular
history?
area?
The emphasis was in geography, but it's history. Yep. And then a minor in political science.
So
Wow, so we have a cop here that didn't get a criminal justice degree.
Yeah.
you might be the first.
I was about to say you are in a small community. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And part of that's probably because you didn't want to be one at the beginning, right? People that wanted, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go get criminal justice," and you realize, man, I could have majored in whatever I wanted, and
I
still been
always
a cop.
mean to ask that, but I don't want it to sound offensive. But whenever somebody is like, "Yeah, I criminal justice," I'm like, do you just hate yourself for that? Like,
well, if you phrase it like that, then yes.
Like, I wish I had like anything, like a business, something else that was like an alternative.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you get criminal justice, you can show up and you're like, oh, none of that matters.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I mean, it's college in general, though.
Yeah.
once you get the real world, you're like, man, I didn't need to know that stuff. Like,
Facts. It's just a whole lot of stress for nothing.
yeah.
So as somebody who's very minimally college educated, the history.
He's referring to himself.
Yes.
Just FYI. So just so we're clear.
Your degree your degree combinations don't sound like they go together very naturally.
History and political science?
Or I'll say geography or geology.
So history and the emphasis is geography.
Okay, how does that work?
So how does that well, in our history department, there is certain emphasis that you can have in history. So it just depends on basically everyone has the same degree. It's history, but the emphasis helps you kind of tailor what classes you want to take and you want to study.
Gotcha.
So you can do history with an emphasis on literature. You
Gotcha.
just wanted to focus heavily on the historiography of literature. I like geography. I like going to different cultures and trying to figure out, what makes them tick, you know, and what's the historical context behind that, So that's what I decided to do. It's still a history degree. It's just a different emphasis.
I guess that, it makes sense because you can't just you can't know all of history.
You're right.
Well, then, if you got a history degree, how'd you end up as a science teacher?
Yeah, so in the state of Indiana, like most states, there's a teacher shortage. And so I was on what's called an emergency contract. And so I applied with the state of Indiana for emergency license. And they granted that. And if I wanted to work a second year, I would have to go to school or get some type of credit hours in education.
Gotcha.
But because they were in so need, the state of Indiana is still in so much need of teachers, they grant emergency licenses. And so one of the job positions that were open were science. And so I was like, yeah, sure, whatever.
Just general science or anything specific? Or?
It's seventh grade science, so it has to do with like in seventh grade they learn about Sir Isaac Newton. They learn about all the law of thermodynamics. They learn about gravity. So you just teach to the standard, basically. The state gives you a booklet of standards, and I mean you have to learn how to. I did take some courses on like lesson planning, learning how to lesson plan and learning how to create a lesson plan because you got to turn that into the administrators prior to you teaching it. Your lesson plans. So I learned how to do that. Took some courses and learning how to do that. So
I mean, I guess there's history involved in that.
Yeah, everything's
right.
history.
Yeah, there's
Everything's
a history and everything.
Everything's
So
history.
Like,
yeah.
I can see
Yeah.
where you could slide that in there, right?
And I did it all the time. I can remember. I don't know if y'all know too much about the demographics of South Bend, but the school that I was working in was a predominantly black school, and so I made a big deal about Black History Month and Black scientists. Like that's not necessarily science. I mean, it's science because I'm learning about those persons, but I incorporated history with that. You're gonna learn about Macy Jemison. You're gonna learn about Neil deGrasse Tyson. You're gonna learn about all these George Washington Carver or who have you. So man, I was always sprinkling. Some man.
Well, and that's history to be sure, but also your, and just in my observational experience with the Black community, is seeing somebody that looks like you doing something is significant. It's something that I would not have thought for a long time would have mattered as much as it obviously does. So you're not just teaching the history of it; you're also inspiring someone to be a scientist.
Well, that's the hope. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
We have a lack of role models across all young people today.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like if we can't find some modern role models, then sometimes turning the dial back a little bit, and then to people that had it harder than you because of the time frame or whatever, like that can be just as inspirational as like. Because the thing is, like, who's like when you look at some of the famous people now, it's like, and I'm willing to call out the vast majority of famous people. It's like y'all ain't living that great. Like, like I don't want my kids looking up to most of the famous role people. It's nah. I'd rather them like look back at these pinnacle figures in history and go, oh no, like that guy changed the world or changed his industry or whatever it is. Until we could raise up some better role models.
Yeah.
Then
it's just shining light on those role models we have today because they're there. They're just not publicized or talking about enough. So part of like. Some things that give me peace being a police officer is the fact that when I go to communities in Grand Prairie that's predominantly black, like those black kids are going to see a black officer, and I'm going to do my best to make sure I treat their parents with respect, make sure that they see that I'm professional and that this is something that you can be and it can be rewarding for you. And so I do think about that a lot, is how am I portraying myself to these people right now, even though I'm in their house on a disturbance, and I have to be this show of force,
Yeah.
How can I still provide dignity to everybody there? And they know, man, I can call GPPD when I'm in trouble.
Yeah. it's not the same, but it's, I always felt that a little bit on domestics when you have, because unfortunately
for males.
Exactly. The vast majority of
Yep.
domestic violence suspects are males. And so I always kind of felt a personal obligation to kind of have a little extra conversation when there was like that 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old boy in the house seeing this. Because it can go two ways.
Yeah.
It can go, hey, these are the people that take my dad out of the house because he comes home and plays the victim, or it's hopefully I've been able to get across that men don't behave that way.
Young ladies too. It's like, this is not how women deserve to be treated. So like, don't grow up
100%.
thinking like, oh, me being beat by my boyfriend or why. Like, so yeah, there's definitely perceptions that, and we have the ability to go either way with it just by putting in a little bit of effort to try to change some of those perspectives. And some of us are able to do that better than others.
And being aware of that, of course, when the scene is safe, right?
Yeah.
Of course, when everything
have your gun out and be like, hey, let me talk to you,
right. No, of course, when the scene is safe and everything's, has calmed down. Yeah. Like, I think that's the first step, is really to be cognizant and aware of, okay, my presence is here, and what is my presence saying at this particular moment right now? What is my tone saying and conveying when everything has been calmed down, of course. But I think it's a beautiful part of being a police officer, is when you really recognize the type of influence and power you have. And so earlier you kind of mentioned it a little bit, you would say like coming from teaching and in ministry, like I view law enforcement in the same vein as ministry. I really do. Yeah. And not just ministering to, the people that we serve, but also to other officers. And your presence matters, and how you carry yourself and how you be a professional. It matters,
We see people at their worst, and that's including our fellow officer, right? So it can be for sure, because we do have that unique opportunity, and we also have to know ourselves to know when to bring it back down and become that resource, or that, like I said, and we have teaching moments, right? Not every encounter involves enforcement action, right? Sometimes it's like, all right, we're going to have a conversation about why what you're doing is wrong, and then we're going to part ways, So there is that education aspect too, for sure. I think we wear so many hats that sometimes, some days I'm like, oh, I wear that hat too. Yeah. All right, well, I guess I'm going to be that as well to the people I serve. Yeah, for sure.
Like the first time, like I always mentioned, the first time I went to Days and started getting like financial crimes reported to me, I'm like, sounds like an FBI kind of thing, not really a street cop kind of thing.
Oh yeah, all the old people getting scammed out of stuff, and it's like we can't do much, but it's an opportunity if you take that little extra and be like, all right, let me be this resource to them as well, and try to get them educated on. You shouldn't send random people that call you on the phone thousands of dollars. That makes sense to some people, but some people maybe it doesn't. So you have to.
If there's a plus sign next to the phone number that calls you, just don't answer it.
Yeah, for sure. How did you end up in GP? So you said your wife's from Fort Worth and everything, and then you came down here. How'd you end up
in Grand
Prairie of all the because we have tons of good law enforcement agencies, right? All of them are hiring. So how'd you end up here?
I was about to say, a couple. Be strict on the couple. Just couple. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Know who you are.
Every time we ask for help in the chase and you say no.
There are there are
You're
some,
the couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how I get to GP. So my wife and I, we got married in April. And so April of 2017, she'll be happy that I know that date, Anyways,
it's too early to forget. You better know it.
Oh, you're right. So we were trying to figure out where we're going to live. She was working at MCA, and at this time I was still working in Merchant Street in West Dallas. So as you can see, Arlington and West Dallas, it's like, where are we going to live to make sure that our commute is not crazy,
Sure.
And so we were like, we got to live somewhere like that's centrally located, and Grand Prairie is a centrally located city. And so we decided to live. They were called Timberview Ranch back then. Now they're Bexley Mansfield off of 360.
Okay.
So that was our very first apartment. And a fellow officer, a Grand Prairie officer, lived in that apartment as well. And so I would always work out, and he would always work out at the apartment. And one thing led to another, and that's how I got interested here in Grand Prairie. But that's how I got here was we had to figure out, commute times to Dallas and to Arlington.
Right.
We are centrally located. Those are our two neighbors.
That is true. Not saying those are the two neighbors that don't help us, but
just saying. I'm just stating facts.
They
Yeah, they are neighbors. They are our neighbors, and like the area that you did work, like that is an area that butts up to Grand Prairie, and we also deal with the some of the fallout and the stuff from that West Dallas area. So like we're familiar with the people, and maybe not so much the area, but we definitely see some of the spillover from those communities as well.
I think that's what gives us the kind of unique position of it's weird that we're as aggressive of an department as we are as far as enforcement and proactivity and trying to solve problems before they happen, but then also having as much support as we do. Because if you police like this in some of the bigger cities around here, it would, I mean, there would be issues.
Some problems.
It'd be a good time though.
Yeah, that's true. But and we definitely have our homegrown issues. Like we definitely have our locals that are habituals, like anywhere would. But I think it's because we are kind of situated in the middle and we get so many of our problems are from outside that the majority of people are like, it's a really cool thing to be a cop in because we get a lot of action, but the area itself is still nice. It's a weird.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many through roads that go from like through Grand Prairie. It's not necessarily like, oh, the road goes to Grand Prairie. It's just so many roads that go through from Pioneer to Jefferson or Davis or
major interstates, 30 and 20. Like
we have so many that go through, and so then stuff just kind of like is brought to the city, even though if no one's actually destination is the city. Right. So it is Grand Prairie is a very weird city because I grew up in Texas. I never heard of Grand Prairie. Now, granted, I didn't live up here, but I lived down in Central Texas. But it wasn't until like coming up here that it was like, oh, there's this really big city that exists called Grand Prairie. Yeah. And even though it's called Grand Prairie, it's actually not like a rural like podunk.
There's no prairies.
There's no prairies here.
Not anymore.
No, IKEA was sitting on one prairie that we had back in the day, and it's all being developed. But we don't really have. So we get a lot of spill of the people coming through, but at the same time, the city itself is like our top 10 safest cities in Texas, and we're on the map for so many different reasons, and so it is a unique place to work for sure, and live as well.
I had a question for you. You mentioned. It sounds anyway like when you're talking about like your ministry and you draw a lot of parallels between teaching and law enforcement. Do you see yourself either one going back to either of those or two kind of continuing kind of like the ministry something you could do while you're in law enforcement? Is that something you see happening or no?
Man, I like to be where my feet are. Right now it's Grand Prairie Police Department. The more and more I start to think about the future, the more and more I start to give a lot of time to it, the more anxious I get. I can get very anxious when I start to, us as men and husbands, we got the weight sometimes it feels like we got the weight of the world on our shoulders, and so one way to combat that feeling is to, okay, my feet are planted here and this is my job right now. And I'm going to just trust in the Lord and keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah. As far as like the hope, not necessarily a hope, but I can definitely see myself teaching again. I don't know in what capacity that may be. It might even be here at the police department. There might be opportunities here to teach. There's an academy. I actually just became a basic instructor, so that's an opportunity to teach. And so that maybe not the state standard educational classroom, but there's other opportunities to teach here at the department that can fulfill that itch.
Yeah.
Because we've got like the Citizens Police Academy, we've got the Explorers, there's definitely a lot. Talking about from a SWAT guy perspective, there's definitely ample opportunities to teach. Now, granted, it's all like police stuff, and not so much like you're not teaching history or whatever. I mean, there's history involved in that, but most of it's like tactics or maybe about penal code and that kind of stuff. So there's definitely ample opportunities, and if you put yourself out there, they'll use and abuse you as an instructor. So now you put it out there, you're basic instructor.
That's okay. That's all right.
I will say that was a super, like, a third of the way through that answer. I felt like I was talking to somebody, like an athlete who didn't want to say if he was interested in being traded or not. It's very
oh no, it was definitely
very
like
political.
yes, it was like, all right, Chief, I'm not planning on leaving. Like
yeah, man, you gotta do what you gotta do.
All right, well, we've about used up all our time. I always try to give the opportunity to talk to young guys, or I guess even older guys, but people who are entertaining the idea of the profession or our department in particular. If they're at the table and you have the opportunity to speak to them, what are you saying?
To it, like just to the younger generation, just in general.
So somebody that you think needs to be spoken to.
Okay. Yeah. Regardless of what the media may say about policing, regardless of what your friends might say or your family might say, it's still an honorable profession. It's still something that you can be proud of. It's still something that there's a sense of honor and duty. There's not a lot of more of those occupations out, in our world today, but policing definitely fulfills that service road, and want to have like an honorable profession. And so I would just tell that person, like, hey, if you're interested in it, explore that interest. Like legit explore it, and for you and for who you are. Not don't you can ask and get advice from all the people in the world. Everyone has a say in what they think policing is. But if you're interested in it, you take the time and do the research. If you want and desire to be a police officer, do it. You never know. You may end up loving it, and you just never know. Don't allow other people's advice or even me. Like if I were giving them advice, like don't allow that to be the final say so in either your interest in being a police officer or becoming or not becoming. Like do it for yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. Cool. You got that?
No.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. I know it's a little weird sitting down doing this a little outside the ordinary, but it's fun.
No, thank you.
All right, guys. Till next time.
Forgot to plug this badge.